want to recognize my collaborators on the AI project that I'm going to share with you all. These amazing PhD students at the University of Chicago and a colleague of mine at Stanford Law, Dan Sutton. Doing this kind of work requires great interdisciplinary teams, and I've been really lucky to have them as collaborators. Okay, to start us off, I'm going to talk first about some of the key lessons I've learned from engaging in the ShotSpotter debate first, and then pivot to this sharing some preliminary findings from a paper we're going to release next week on AI police reports. And so I'm going to assume that people in the audience have very little background, and so ShotSpotter is this technology that claims to detect gunshots and help police and first responders arrive to aid someone who has been shot faster than a 911 call. The technology has been controversial for many years now. There's been a strong push among activists to push the city of Chicago to cancel its contract with the technology. There have been many supporters of the technology. And I'm not going to go over the particular details of what makes the technology effective or ineffective, because that's really irrelevant for what I'm going to present today, because what I'm going to talk about is a little bit like the lay of the land of like how research and evidence is used to support claims, because I think that AI companies or any company that's trying to sell AI technologies, well, any smart ones, have been watching the ShotSpotter debate in Chicago very closely, because it's a really, really powerful case, an example of the kinds of things to expect when a new AI product enters into city government or begins to get adopted by a city agency. And so I'll start off with three quick lessons from this debate. So first, one key lesson from this is that companies, let me move this so I can see my own slides. Companies are going to abuse trade secret provisions to avoid independent scrutiny. Legal scholar Hannah Block-Weaver has written about this. And so whether it's companies like Sound Thinking or any private firm that you can imagine that does business with the city, selling a technology, they tend to assert secrecy over their products, even when disclosing it would cause no commercial harm. They resist discovery and they hide behind protective orders in criminal cases, or they price access to their data so high that it's out of the reach of most of the public. And the way that this played out in the ShotSpotter debate was that the strongest evidence that ShotSpotter had some costs, both to the police department and the city, came from a FOIA mistake. And so there's this really great paper by two economists at the University of California, Santa Barbara, that will be coming out soon in a really high-impact economics journal on the unintended consequences of ShotSpotter. And what they were looking at was the way that all of these ShotSpotter alerts were potentially slowing down police response to priority one calls. These are calls of violent crimes in progress. And because what was happening, based on research done both by the Office of the Inspector General and the MacArthur Justice Center, that a lot of the ShotSpotter alerts that police were responding to were cases where no one was around, where there was no guns, there was no evidence. And so during peak hours, when the police are the busiest, when the police were responding to a lot of ShotSpotter alerts, it turned out that in that crucial time window, they found that police responded 23% slower to dispatched calls. They arrived 30% slower for arrival on the scene, and that the probability of an arrest happening decreased by 9%. And so a journalist got wind of this study, Matt Chapman, a collaborator and colleague of mine. He saw that this study came out and made use of data that previously no one had gotten access to. And so he did what any good journalist would do, which is file a public records request for the exact same data that the economists had filed a public records request for. And to his surprise, his denial or his FOIA request was denied. And he received a letter explaining this from a sound thinking executive. So this is a portion of the letter. It's on sound thinking letterhead. I'll share a link to the whole letter in a bit. But what's most crucial here was what I highlight here is that at its core, it writes, the real issues that Chicago should have not created and released the various documents for any of the noted requests, nor did sound thinking know Chicago was doing so. And so I'm pulling a quote here from what was like a 3 or 4 page letter written by what looks like Sound Thinking's chief legal counsel. It says, quote, and this is really crucial here to the point about trade secrets, Chicago should not have created any of those reports and provided them as public records because the data is owned by Sound Thinking, not Chicago. And taken as a whole, the aggregated data represents trade secrets held by Sound Thinking. And so this is just like, I bring this up as just one concrete example of the way that data ownership and these trade secrets provisions block any kind of independent scrutiny. And I think many in the public assume that a lot of the sound evidence around used for studies of sound thinking and ShotSpotter were done as a result of the company's transparency and openness. It turns out for these particular set of studies, that wasn't the case. It was all the result of a mistakenly released data set. Okay, lesson number 2. Peer review is becoming less and less important in this space. And what's becoming much more important are platforms. I would say on both sides, amongst those working with companies and then those working in the accountability spaces. And so the key example to walk through this with you is our study, which we put out, I want to say a month and a half ago on Chicago after ShotSpotter, where we did a very simple descriptive map showing the change in response times to priority 1 calls in police beats that previously had ShotSpotter devices in the 6 months after the microphones were turned off. And it turns out, to our surprise, that response times improves pretty drastically. And we got some good feedback on this initial release that to account for seasonality. And so even when we compared the same exact months to the year prior, there were still pretty drastic improvements in the response times. And we released this, not peer-reviewed, just as a descriptive study. It's so descriptive and basic, it likely would not have gotten published in a basic social science journal. And we released all of the data publicly for replication. But what's interesting is that in response to this, the CEO of the company, Ralph Clark, I think within 24, 48 hours, immediately authored this blog post on the company's website, engaging with our work and critiquing it. And I just wanted to note the first critique that he mentions in the blog post was that our study was not peer reviewed, which is fine and dandy. And it's a critique that, I own and I think is valid. At the same time, however, the blog post and several of several of the technology's advocates cited this study by the UChicago Crime Lab. This, I guess you could call it a quote unquote study because it was actually published as an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune, which is not a scientific journal and is also not peer reviewed. And so, on the one hand, they're critiquing our study for not being peer reviewed, yet citing the Crime Lab study, which is not peer reviewed, as the basis of a rebuttal. And as much as those of us social scientists want to pull our hair out at this kind of like ridiculous debate, I think there's some important lessons here, which is I think the general public could kind of really care less about whether or not the study is peer reviewed. Probably a small segment of the public really cares. What matters more here is that outlets like the Chicago Tribune editorial board are becoming de facto editors of social science. And I would also add that it goes on the flip side. So our study got initial coverage from WTTW, which also had to go through, I guess, its own scientific process of evaluating our study to decide whether or not it was something that they would take up. And I think, you know, if I could speculate for a moment, I think most of the public actually read the WTTW article more than they actually read our study, because if they read the study, they would have, gotten a lot more context. But in any case, these are really, really valuable lessons to learn about how, if you produce any kind of valid study, any kind of study about a technology, this is the ecosystem, the information ecosystem that you have to navigate to have impact. Okay. Third, this is a point about, I guess, the role of research when it comes to technologies in city government. I think, and this is like a message mostly for like researchers or people in like the data science space, which is that, I think a really valuable lesson here is that as researchers, we often like to think of ourselves as objective, neutral arbiters of truth, or I would say umpires, right, of a baseball game, calling balls and strikes. And that's a really, really gross oversimplification of how research is done in the real world. And that what I argue is a crucial lesson is that a lot of this research is embedded in a world where people are trying to regulate what is a fragmented and under-regulated tech marketplace. And what this means is that there really is no such thing as an independent researcher. That based on the kinds of questions that the researcher is asking, the kind of data that they have access to, whether it's privileged access through a data user agreement entered into with a company, or whether it's data acquired through public records requests, like what my shop does, what you end up is a world where researchers are operating on a spectrum, where they are doing research for product development and refinement, which is fine and dandy, like companies need R&D. And then on the flip side of that, you have research for consumer protection, research that's aimed at trying to identify the harms. And this is really crucial because as much as we like to think of policing as a public enterprise, the truth is it is a marketplace. Investment firms like Insight Partners, IBIS World, Deloitte, JP Morgan Chase that do these investment reports refer to this world as the law enforcement marketplace. And it's a huge market. So local public safety systems, whether it's police departments, whether it's like whole entire government agencies, are potential customers for companies trying to sell their products. And it's a huge and vastly growing industry. And so part of one of the key lessons here is that doing research in this space is more than just trying to figure out what works. It's trying to like navigate and create a regulatory system in an environment where there's gross underfunding and insufficient support for regulation. Okay, so how does all of this matter for AI and policing? AI companies are likely to use the trade secrets exemptions to block independent evaluations, or I think more importantly, evaluations that are asking questions that the industry don't want investigated by the public. Number two, that what this kind of public-private system is going to do is it's going to create a market for third-party auditors that's going to emerge to perform quote-unquote independent auditing. And this is really troublesome because who are these third-party auditors? Who's funded by them? If you take lessons from the history of like tobacco regulation and lead regulation, those industries form associations who then fund scientists to claim to be independent auditors, and it turns out they're not really independent auditors. And so that's another huge can of worms to expect. And lastly, media platforms, I think this has been true already for quite some time. Media platforms are replacing peer review and social science journals in disseminating knowledge about the benefits and harms of technologies. Okay, so what to do? And so what I've done in a new research project is try to think about developing an approach to trying to study AI products in government through what we call public interest AI auditing. So I'm going to begin to pivot here now to the second half of the presentation. So we refer to public interest AI auditing as rigorous systematic simulations of an AI system's core claims built and conducted outside of the vendor's control. This is what's most crucial about it. And it's conducted not to really determine what works and what doesn't, but to simply inform the public, policymakers, and regulators about what these products are capable of. More to like help generate productive questions than to provide concrete answers. And so the case I'm going to talk you through about this approach we're trying to develop is with the product of AI-assisted police reports. So there's about half a dozen companies like Axon and Code4 that are creating technologies that take body-worn camera footage and transcribe it or feed the video of it into an AI model and use that as the basis to draft a first report, or sorry, a first draft of a report for the police officer to then edit and then file. And these products vary. So Axon's is marketed as a time saver for officers and a force multiplier, with the idea that officers are spending so much time filing paperwork and police reports that this kind of automated process helps to save their time so that they could be doing other things. Code4 claims to customize their tool to each individual police department's needs. And what's really crucial here is that Code4 claims to use a video language model. Axon's is purely based off of audio transcripts, and this will matter for reasons I'm going to share in a little bit, because many people in the industry question the accuracy of anything having to do with video. Okay, so what's at stake here? Well, police reports of traffic incidents, crimes, stops, they produce facts from the police officer's perspective of what happened, when, and why. And we know from many of the studies that are coming out on various other kinds of products that large language models are prone to hallucinations. And so a minor error can mean the difference between prison and freedom for some. And what we know through the great work of groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that hundreds of police departments are already using AI-assisted police reports. And so getting access to try and answer a basic question about how these products hallucinate is extremely difficult because of what I mentioned earlier about the trade secrets barriers. And so what we've done to get around this is create our own tool. So I worked with a legal scholar, a computational social scientist, and a group of sociology PhD students, a really amazing interdisciplinary team, to try and create our own version of an AI-assisted police draft report writing tool that we have called PARIS, which stands an acronym for the Police AI Report and Incident Simulator. It's open source. We're going to release the code for it in a couple of days when we release our working paper, so stay tuned for that. And what it does is it takes video footage from body-worn cameras and creates various pipelines so that if you wanted a transcript-only driven a draft of a police report, you can produce that. If you wanted the AI to draft a police report based on video and audio, you can do that. You can reconfigure the prompts. You can select which AI model you want to use. So we've done this so far we've integrated so far Gemini, ChatGPT, and DeepSeek. To our knowledge, ChatGPT is the most commonly used tool amongst the firms working in this market, but we're still trying to integrate some of the other ones. And so what this does is it approximates what an AI, if an AI were to draft a report of from any kind of video footage that you enter into it, it creates a draft of it based on however you want to prompt it. And what we did was we leaned on our collaborator, Dan Sutton, who's a lawyer at Stanford and who has experience working in offices where officers have been trained on how to write police reports. And so he was the one who drafted the prompt based on his experience of how most police departments that at least he's worked with in California, how they've instructed officers to write reports. I'd be happy to share the exact details of how we wrote up the prompt later on. But this was a basic overview of how we produced our own tool. And so with this tool, we set out in this study to answer two really basic questions. What are AI-generated police reports capable of hallucinating? And how often do they hallucinate? And I should say really quickly that this study is not a replication of and doesn't claim to evaluate any of the AI tools that are currently on the market. It's purely just a simulation aimed at trying to give us a sense of what these tools can do, because firms in this space are not providing the open access to the public precisely to do these kinds of studies. And so what we did for the study was focus on 3 cases of videos. I'm only going to describe one for the purposes of time, because I'm really trying to stick to 30 minutes here. And what I'm going to share with you today is body camera footage from an incident in Tallahassee, Florida, where a gentleman, Calvin Riley Sr., was pulled over on suspected DUI. And what was really, I guess, famous or infamous about this particular video, which is online, which is online, publicly accessible, was that there was a sealed bottle of vodka in the car that the officer who was searching the vehicle found. And the body-worn camera footage shows that the officer opened the bottle, emptied out the contents, and threw it back into the car. And this, the end result of this was Calvin Riley hired some lawyers and sued, claiming that the officer was planting evidence. On the flip side, the officer admitted to opening and emptying the bottle and throwing it back in, but claimed that they thought that they were following the police's policies in doing this. Either way, the point is that both sides in this particular case agreed that the vodka bottle was sealed in the car when it was found. And so what I'm going to share with you are the results of how Paris, based on how we configured it, and we configured it to the most conservative settings, like set the temperature to 0, even though you really can't set the temperature to 0. And I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A for the more AI savvy people in the audience. But we did what industry claims to do, which is set the temperature, what's it called? Set the temperature to 0 to minimize hallucination as much as we possibly can. And I'm just going to play the video for you in a second. Sorry. This is the video.
Vodka in his seat,
so the officer is finding the so see it there. So
vodka in his seat,
I'm going to speed up just for the sake of time because it's a little bit long. So you can see. Okay. You see the officer emptying the vodka bottle? At least you hear it. Screws it back on and throws it back in. Okay. And here is the output of a sample of one of the Paris-generated police report drafts. And I'll read this for you. It says, a search of the vehicle incident to arrest was conducted. I located a small open bottle of vodka in a pouch on the driver's seat. I also observed a strong odor of alcoholic beverage. The open container was disposed of per department policy. So it hallucinated that the bottle was open. Okay, how often did this happen? Or actually, let me get to this. We use this finding to introduce the term justificatory hallucination, which we define as unverifiable events or details that provide reasons for an officer's actions. And so the vodka bottle offers us an example to come up with some terminology to think about some of the problematic hallucinations that can come as a result of this tool. Okay, so we ran this video 100 times, and 70 of the 100 reports hallucinated that the vodka bottle was open. And I should say that half of these simulations were done where it was just the transcript, and the other half were done where it was just the video. And the more startling finding is that when we fed the video footage to the AI, 100% of the time, it hallucinated that the vodka bottle was open. Another kind of hallucination that came up just really quickly were what we call procedural hallucinations, which is when the AI inserts legal procedures that the officers should take in the exchange, but didn't actually take based on the video. And I should say real quickly that we had human coders watch all the videos and code all of the transcripts to verify each of the facts that were written in the AI drafting reports. And so one example of how this appeared in the Paris-generated reports was this line: Mr. Riley was informed of his rights and the procedures being followed, when in reality, the video never showed that he was read his rights, at least on the video. Okay. There's one kind of like big, I think, uncomfortable insight from all of this that I've learned from doing this research, which is that I found myself in writing this up a bit uncomfortable with calling this a hallucination, because one department's hallucination may be another police department's script. Let me just tell you what I mean by this. So when in our process of doing research on this topic, we talked to some people in the private sector who are working in this space and learned that in some police departments, police chiefs are asking if it's possible to program an AI to automatically insert that certain legal procedures were followed. That's really, really, really troubling. And you know, the individual who I was speaking to responded saying that their company wanted nothing to do with providing this kind of service. But the point here is that there likely will be a firm that's going to emerge and sell precisely that kind of product. And so while procedural hallucinations may appear like hallucinations, for what we know, police departments might actually be asking firms to configure their AIs to optimize something other than officer time savings. And so what I have here at the bottom are just some examples of this. That the real question here isn't whether or not the model is accurate or not. The question is, what are police departments trying to have the AI optimize? That to me is the big black box. And for some police departments, it is going to be officer time. Like, let's try to automate things. For other police departments, it's going to be inserting the legal language in police reports to, minimize officer liability to lawsuits or protect officers in different ways. This is a really big question that, our study itself doesn't have the answer to, but I think a contribution for the approach that we're laying out here is that by running these simulations, we're able to see potential huge crossroads in the future for any government trying to entertain contracting with one of these firms for this kind of technology. Okay, we're gonna be wrapping up here and I'll open it up for questions. So how do we advance public interest AI auditing? So a couple of thoughts here to wrap everything up. First, support communities, kind of like Shy Hack Night, with creating open source versions of AI tools that are being sold to governments. My research team focused on AI generated police reports because that's kind of like in the area of what we do. But I'm sure many of you in the audience can think of an AI tool that is likely going to be introduced in education or public transit, go down the list. And, it's not too labor intensive and it's not too expensive to create open source versions of this. And it would be great to support an ecosystem of organizations and professionals to do precisely this kind of work so that different versions of the simulations that we ran can be done for other kinds of products. A second major lesson is to push local governments to modernize their tech procurement. It's an understatement to say that city governments are woefully under-equipped and underfunded and underprepared for updating the way it does business with technology firms. The ACLU of Illinois has done a really great job of creating a set of guidelines for local governments on how to do this work. I think it would be really great if philanthropy could step up to really help with cities modernizing this infrastructure. Third, support simulations as a basis for descriptive insight into AI. Simulations are a pretty common methodology. It's used in weather forecasting. It's used in epidemiology. It's used in a variety of social sciences. It's used for military purposes, war games, right? So simulations are a valid and very frequently used social scientific method that I think the world of evidence-based policymaking, especially in the tech world, needs to pivot towards, given that I don't think any of us can expect in the short term or even the long term, private firms to open up their books and allow independent evaluators to vet their products. Like I'm not holding my breath in that. Lastly, to invest in basic science to determine what questions local governments need to be asking industry and what benchmarks should be created. Instead of simply asking the overly simple question of what works and what doesn't. Okay, if you are interested in getting access to Paris, we want to make this publicly available. Doing so comes at some cost, and so I can't make it truly openly available, although I'm hoping to eventually. But this is a link. If you open this QR code, it'll take you to a Google form where you could put some basic information, and we could at least put you on a list of an email list of folks who want to get access to the tool, and I can have my team follow up with you to get you access, because this is a tool that we want more users using to configure the AIs in a variety of different ways, to ask questions that we are not asking. If you have any other questions or comments, my email address is below. Thank you for listening. I know that's a lot to cover in 30 minutes, but I'll end there. Thank you. I'll open it up for questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the great presentation, very informative, and we have several audience questions coming in. So I'll get right into it with the first audience question for our speaker. Won't defense attorneys be able to point to AI use when they're creating reports to beat cases that come up in court?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges that, and I'll share a link to this if I can open up the chat somewhere. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has done some great journalism on this and shown that companies like Axon are designing their tool in a way that makes it very difficult to identify what aspects of the report was generated by AI and which ones weren't. And so the current regulatory environment doesn't require police departments or companies to really outline where the AI was. And when you can't evaluate something, then it creates a different set of constraints. I'm not a lawyer, but I would venture to guess that in that kind of with that kind of uncertainty, I would like to think that a judge would be skeptical about something with that level of uncertainty. But if there's something we've learned in the last year, is that judges are making all sorts of crazy decisions this year. So your bet is as good as mine. But I think step one is trying to create a regulatory environment and infrastructure to help defense lawyers really answer that question concretely.
So I see a couple of questions about body cam footage in general, and the example that you provided of the body cam footage in particular. And maybe I'll start with the question related to the specific example that we all saw during the presentation. For the simulations of the vodka bottle body cam footage, do we know what the results looked like when the temperature of the model was not set to 0, rather than set to 0?
We haven't ran that, but we could pretty easily. It might perform better. It might not, but I will take that suggestion and have my team run it. And if you're interested in running it, whoever asked the question, please sign up, because we want more questions to be investigated like that.
And then zooming out a little bit to body cam footage in general, to what extent do defense attorneys and defense teams have access to original body cam footage in a case? And what does it matter if there's such an access? To what extent are the hallucinations impactful in a case?
Yeah, I don't know. My collaborator, Dan Sun, would probably be the better person to answer that. If you please feel free to email me your questions and I can have him follow up 3 questions. I just put my email in the chat too. I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer.
Well, thanks. It seems like one thing that open source models can't do well is with specific prompts that police departments are using. Are the prompts also something that companies are claimed to be trade secrets?
Yes, that's a big black box. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, we haven't been successful, is trying to find police chiefs who would be willing to give us their sense of how they would draft the prompt for us to test and see how it runs. To me, that's the black box, and that's precisely the kinds of questions that I think local governments need to be asking their police chiefs and the vendors. If it's possible, maybe, and local governments are in right now, some elected officials are brainstorming ways, ordinances, legislation to try and regulate these technologies. And I think, one way to try and get ahead of this would be to propose legislation or ordinances that require the prompts to be openly, to be open and public, and not protected by trade secrets. And that, a condition for any vendor doing business with the city of Chicago requires those prompts to be made public. This is why procurement reform and updating is so important. But it's getting people excited about procurement is is a challenge.
Do we know something about the difference of results for the simulations between audio-only cases on one hand, and then video AI-assisted reports on the other hand?
Yeah, so the transcript versions do better than the ones that are based off of audio and video. And if I could pull up my actual findings, I want to say that the transcript only version hallucinated 40% of the time, whereas the video hallucinated 100% of the time. And I should also say too that in the paper we go over a much broader set of facts, and there are some things that the tools do really well at getting accurate. And so again, I want to be really cautious about the study, painting broad brushstrokes about what these tools, can and can't do. But I think, my hope is that by giving you all a peek under the hood of this simulation, you can take this question to, whichever, elected official that represents you, or to your local government bodies, and urge them to ask precisely these kinds of questions to yeah, to their police departments and these firms.
I also see a question about to what extent the body cam videos are publicly accessible, to what extent the resulting AI output or AI reports on those videos are accessible for
Yeah.
folks to study, for folks to try to reproduce.
They are largely inaccessible. There's a political scientist named Dean Knox, who I recently saw do a study of police body-worn cameras footage where he used AI to try and code this massive like terabytes upon terabytes of data of body-worn camera footage to try and create a measure of uses of force that are not recorded, to try to and estimate that. And he got access to it through a data user agreement with an anonymous police department. And so, to answer the question, body-worn camera footage is not publicly available. And I should also say too, troublingly, so are police reports themselves. So one of the things we tried to do was, because slowly on the news, you can identify, a couple dozen police departments that are using one of these AI tools. And what we did was file public records requests for copies of police reports for like DUI incidents, traffic stops, before and after the police department used the tool. And I want to say 95% of our FOIA requests were rejected because in many of these states, unless you're a party in the incident, if you're involved in the incident, the police don't have any obligation to share the written reports. That is really bad. Again, for like trying to do anything in this space. And so, I think all of your questions are great, and they're illuminating just how much of an opaque world this already is. And when you're adding AI to this, it's just a recipe for a whole lot of trouble.
An audience member points out the Riley video is famous, very famous on the internet, and that there's a lot of public discourse on the internet already. And question is whether models are reflecting some of what that public discourse has to say, and if that impacts hallucinations or not.
I think it might. The challenge we faced in trying to address precisely that concern is that when you look at the corpus of body-worn camera footage that's publicly available, it tends to be instances that have received a lot of media coverage and that are all over the web. And so it's hard to find a counterfactual. I have sent many emails to lawyer friends of mine that have access to video, and in the two other cases that we selected, we tried to select one that was had less media coverage. I think the right way to do this would be, a researcher needs to find and get access to somebody who has a large corpus of body-worn camera footage to do precisely this. But, if anyone in the audience has tips on a good repository of body-worn camera footage where we could do this, that would be great. But yeah, I think this audience member's intuition is correct. I think that probably has some things to do with it. Yeah, it would be great to find a way to do a better simulation. The other thing I thought about doing was hiring actors to enact some of these common kinds of scenarios precisely to try to get around that. I don't have the time or the resources to do that, but one of you all probably should. Sounds like a great idea for someone to take up. As you can see, there's so many different things that can be done with this tool, and I think you all should do.
I think we have time for a final question, and I see an audience question about how AI monitoring of videos takes place in the jail space and the prison space. Any thoughts on jails and prisons that are using AI to monitor live feeds to alert guards to things that are going on?
Yeah, I've seen the headlines of some of the news articles written about this. I don't know enough about um about these specific technologies to like, know what they're doing and what could be going on with them. But whoever asked this question, I highly encourage you to send me an email because one of the things I've been trying to do is gather a list of products that people know are being used in the real world, because we could likely create our own version of it to try and run simulations and ask questions about capabilities and accuracy that can hopefully then be the basis for asking questions to policymakers about how these technologies are actually being operated.
Well, I'd like to take a chance to thank our speaker for this great presentation, for the great information, and for engaging with the audience questions. And thanks to the audience for all the insightful questions. First, I see our speakers' contact information in the meeting chat, so reach out with other questions that come to your mind. But once more, thanks for the great presentation.
Thank all of you for the really great questions. All of your questions give me hope that this work is useful. And I hope that you take the questions that you asked me with you to your respected elected officials to try and do something with this, because we can all really see all of the headaches likely to come as a result of it.
Cool. So with that, we're going to shift gears to the civic hacking portion of our evening. Thanks to our speaker. I think that Sneha is going to guide us into our next portion of the evening. So stay tuned, and we'll get going with that in a couple of minutes.
Hello, everyone. Give me a few minutes, but we'll get started in about 5 minutes. So if you want to grab some water, take a little bit of a break before we get into the next breakout group portion, feel free to do that now, and we'll come back at 8:05.